Welcome to this explainer. Today we're unpacking a condition that affects millions, but honestly is so frequently misunderstood. If you, or maybe someone you love, lives with chronic tinnitus, you already know it's way more than just a phantom sound. It is a relentless, exhausting mental marathon. But here's the thing. The latest neuroscience is finally revealing exactly why it takes such a massive toll on your mind. And more importantly, how understanding that toll is literally the first real step toward getting some relief.
I want to start by asking a question that I bet hits incredibly close to home. Why does your tinnitus scream the absolute loudest when you're the most stressed out? Look, if you're dealing with this, you are probably exhausted, and I just want to validate that right out of the gate. We are definitely not here today to push some magical quick fix or to minimize what you're going through. We're here to look at the actual hard science of why a brutal week at work suddenly makes the ringing in your ears feel completely unbearable, and what that actually means for your path forward.
Section 1. The Tinnitus-Anxiety Loop, a neurological hijacking. All right, so we need to completely reframe how we think about this condition. Tinnitus is not just an ear issue. Once that initial auditory signal hits your brain, it triggers this physical, two-way neurological loop. Your brain's deep-seated threat detection system literally gets hijacked by the sound, and that creates a self-reinforcing cycle of anxiety and auditory hypersensitivity. Let's actually walk through this step by step. It's basically a 5-stage process. First up, you have the auditory signal itself. Second, your amygdala, which is basically your brain's alarm center, flags that signal as a dangerous threat. Third, your body reacts by spiking stress hormones like cortisol. Fourth, that physiological stress state literally turns up the gain, increasing your central auditory sensitivity. And the fifth step, the perceived volume of your tinnitus gets louder. It's this vicious cycle where stress physically amplifies the sound, which of course just creates more stress.
Now, to put the sheer scale of this problem into perspective, take a look at this number, 32%. According to massive data pulled from the UK Biobank, individuals with tinnitus have a 32% increased risk of developing clinical anxiety compared to the general population. I mean, that is huge, and it completely validates what you might be feeling right now. This isn't just all in your head or some minor annoyance. This is a severe, life-altering condition that structurally rewires your nervous system toward chronic distress.
Moving on to Section 2. Why patients are skeptical. The pushback against coping. Because of that severe distress we just talked about, we really have to acknowledge the elephant in the room. And that is why patients with severe tinnitus often absolutely hate it when doctors tell them to just go use psychological therapies. I mean, let's talk about the very real, very valid patient pushback against the whole concept of just coping with the sound. Have you ever said this to a doctor? My distress isn't the problem, the tinnitus is. Well, if you have, you are entirely justified. From the patient perspective, being told to simply manage your emotional response while a literal siren is screaming inside your head, it feels incredibly dismissive, right? When your tinnitus is highly reactive and unstable, treating only your emotional response is kind of like trying to mop the floor while the sink is still overflowing. And then there's this thought which is so common in the community. Habituation sounds like giving up and learning to live with it. I think this brilliantly highlights the frustration with standard medical advice. For years, early cognitive behavioral therapy approaches felt totally short for people with unstable tinnitus, mostly because it felt like they were just being told to surrender. It felt like passive resignation rather than an actual targeted medical treatment.
Which brings us to Section 3, Brain Retraining Basics, Active Neural Rewiring. So this is exactly where we need to shift our perspective. The most current science totally redefines cognitive behavioral therapy and its accompanying sound therapies, not as some passive way to just deal with it, but as an active structural rewiring of the brain. We aren't just talking about changing your attitude here. We are talking about literally changing the physical pathways your brain uses to process sound. And Dr. Powell Jestroboff's famous neurophysiological model of tinnitus brilliantly illustrates exactly what we're talking about. If you followed the flow of the process, the signal starts at the auditory periphery, right? But then it moves into subconscious detection. Now, if it gets tagged as a threat, it loops directly into the limbic system, your emotional center, and then down into the autonomic nervous system, triggering your fight or flight response. The whole goal of retraining isn't to stop the sound at the ear, but to actually break the links connecting that sound to your nervous system. Let's see how this builds by looking at the specific hardware involved in your brain. Modern retraining targets 3 distinct physical networks. First, your prefrontal cortex evaluates if the sound is actually dangerous. Then,
Your salience network decides if the sound is even worth paying attention to in the first place. And finally, your limbic system attaches that heavy emotional weight to it. By using structured therapy, we can actually stop the brain from automatically allocating its valuable resources to the ringing across all three of these networks.
All right, Section 4, CBT versus medical treatment, the ultimate dual-pronged approach. This brings us to a massive paradigm shift in how we approach recovery. For a really long time, patients felt like they had to choose, right? Like, do I pursue medical care or do I do psychological therapy? But the reality is you don't have to choose. In fact, for chronic, severe cases, you desperately need both. Think of it kind of like this. On the medical intervention side, you're targeting the underlying generator, things like neuroinflammation, sensory gating failures, and overexcited auditory neurons. Think of that as the volume knob. On the other side, we have cognitive behavioral therapy, which targets your brain's response, the threat detection, the salience network, and attention allocation. This is your attention filter. Modern, successful multimodal therapy requires treating the volume knob and the attention filter at the exact same time.
So how do we actually execute this in the real world? Well, first, you absolutely have to stabilize the nervous system medically. You need to address poor sleep and physical sensory gating issues so your symptoms aren't just wildly fluctuating every single day. Why? Because CBT requires a stable signal to retrain against. You simply can't rewire a moving target. Once you're medically stabilized, then you use CBT to retrain that threat appraisal. And remember this, repetition beats duration. It's not about being stuck in therapy for years and years. It's about consistently practicing that new neural response every single day. Which leads us to our final section, Section 5, breaking the tinnitus cycle, the path to relief. So what does all this actually mean for you, just walking around in your daily life? It means that by understanding this dual approach, calming the physical generator medically while simultaneously starving the signal of attention cognitively, you are finally empowered to break the loop. You aren't just at the mercy of the noise anymore. The absolutely crucial point here is habituation. It's considered the holy grail of tinnitus recovery. It's the extinction of the autonomic and limbic response to a stimulus. Basically, it leads to your brain literally reclassifying the tinnitus signal from a blaring red alert threat to just neutral background noise. Habituation is not giving up. It is a biological reclassification. It's not learning to suffer quietly. It's literally training your brain to no longer care.
I want to end this explainer with a question for you to really chew on. If your brain learned to treat your tinnitus as an emergency, which is exactly why you feel so exhausted and anxious right now, what happens when it finally learns the emergency is over? The science shows us that the cycle can be broken, those connections can be unwired, and peace and quiet, even in the presence of sound, is entirely possible. Thanks so much for joining me today, and keep learning.